Hello and welcome to the live podcast, Win More on Purpose. Today we have Toby Goldstein with us on kosher manipulation, how to get the results you want from others. The agenda for those of you who are new, it's going to be a conversation between myself and Mrs. Goldstein. We're all here learning together. Write down those questions. There will be a Q&A at the end, and there will be a special offer at the end, so it's worth staying tuned. For those of you who are live, you can put into the chat where it is that you're coming from, introduce yourself, what do you do, or anything that is on your mind of business related. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Yaacov Steinberg. I am a sales coach for creatives, helping agency owners and solopreneurs land high value clients without feeling like a salesperson. So when I first started this about 5 years ago now, I saw that creative agency owners and solopreneurs are amazing at their craft, but they run into two common struggles. They're in feast or famine sales where they're getting clients, but it's inconsistent. 1 month, they are booked solid. The next, they are scrambling for leads. And two, their selling just feels awkward. They don't want to sound pushy, but being nice just isn't cutting it either. And they're great at their work, but not having a clear sales process is holding them back. And they're stuck working project to project, relying on word of mouth and hoping for the best. And here's the shift. The creatives that I work with don't just learn how to sell, but they learn how to position themselves so clients come to them. We're helping them with mastering sales without feeling salesy, clarifying their offer and sales process, and building real confidence in how they sell so they know who to talk to, where to find them, what to say, and how to say it, all without feeling they're chasing clients. We're helping them go from I hate selling and it feels awkward to I have a simple, repeatable process that works, or I am waiting for referrals to I know exactly how to generate demand for my work. And I'm just undercharging and afraid to raise my rates to clients seeing the value before you even mention the price. I've had the pleasure of dealing with quite a number of people and coaching incredible creatives and entrepreneurs on LinkedIn that are pretty well known, whether it's Chaya Fishman, Hoodie Bloch, Hoodie Greenberger, and Ellie Bash, just to name a few. And thankfully, the agencies and seven-figure business owners that I've worked with have been able to grow 50% in even just 60 days. $100,000 companies, give or less, have been able to grow by even 150% in even 60 to 90 days. And new solopreneurs just starting out have even been able to grow by 240% in as little as 45 days. Mrs. Goldstein, really excited to have you with us here today. Tell us a little bit about yourself and let's get this show on the road.
Thank you for having me. Excited
Absolutely.
as well. So just a little bit about myself. I call myself the people's coach, the people's people coach. I work with companies building up soft skills. So that would be their leadership skills, their communication, time management, customer service. You have a question about a person, I'm generally the go-to person. I'll tell you how to interact, how to deal, how to communicate effectively. This is where the kosher manipulation piece comes in, is how can we talk to get the things done that we want done, and how can we get the things that we need from others? All in a kosher way.
Absolutely fantastic. And I'm really excited to get into this conversation because I think that so many people misunderstand the words even kosher manipulation, which is why we chose to use it, right? It's so classic. People see the word manipulation and right away they just absolutely freak out. So let's start from the basics. What is kosher manipulation?
Simple is manipulation, which is where you want to get something, but all done in a kosher way, which means we're not forcing anybody, we're not twisting any arms, but you need something from somebody else. How are you going to get that? You need this person to produce this particular report. How are you going to ensure that they're producing the report, the one that you want, and on time?
Yeah, and I think that it's fascinating because effectively what we're doing is teaching people how to effectively communicate so others genuinely want what you want, right? And people look at this word manipulation as something that we're forcing other people to do something that they don't want to do. When in reality, that's not what this is about. It's about helping people to see, to guide them to that light at the end of the tunnel that they don't even realize is there, right? And we discussed this even like a couple of minutes before the podcast where, we've both had conversations with people where they weren't necessarily a fit for a position or they, didn't realize that there were so many things that they couldn't see and we had to guide them to those positions. And I think that's a big shift that so many people need to hear.
Correct. It's really effective communication. What I find interesting is unfortunately, we're never taught how to communicate, how to have a conversation with somebody else. We're taught how to give instructions, sometimes how to listen, right? Or how to give directions or telling people, go clean your room, go make your bed, give me the report, be there at the meeting on time, X, Y, Z. So we're used to telling, we're used to instructing. this point, do you know how to have a conversation with the person? You want them there in the meeting on time? You want this report on time? You want your child to clean your room? You want something from somebody? How are you going to communicate that effectively? What's that conversation going to look like?
Right, absolutely. And I think that let's give an example for this to really bring it home. What do you feel is a great example? I think that getting kids into bed is actually a really great example because, willingly versus fighting, right? I think is a great example of how kosher manipulation comes to play, right?
Correct. Correct. I give this example actually with my kids. I share this a couple of times. Let's say I needed the kitchen cleaned and I expect my kids to go ahead and to chip in. Yes, I only have girls, so my girls do help a lot around the house. And I needed the floor swept and garbage taken out. Now, two girls, two different ways of getting these things done. One child, I said, darling, please take out the garbage. And the other one, I said, sweetie, can you please sweep the kitchen floor? And the one who I asked to take out the garbage turned to me and said, Mom, why are you telling me take out the garbage, but you're asking her, can she please sweep the kitchen floor? And I turned to this daughter and I said, the result is going to be the same. You're going to take out the garbage. She's going to sweep the kitchen floor. I am just asking differently because you need to be told to take out the garbage and she needs to be asked. And she turned to me and she said, you're right. Had you asked me, can you please take out the garbage? My answer straight, I would have been, no, I'm not taking it out.
And I think that's the beauty of this. It's really understanding who we're talking to and how they need to be spoken to, right? Which is really the core of what we're talking about here, right? So, usually when people think about how they need to talk to people, they think of it in, I would even say one dimensional, maybe two. But we're really talking about expanding that in a whole different way where we can understand personality types that different people have that we're going to get to a little bit later on in the conversation. But really understanding who it is that we're talking to, how they need to be spoken to, and then utilizing that to help them to understand whatever it is that we want to give over or helping them to see what it is that we want them to see in a way that's easy for them to digest. And I think maybe another example of this is the difference between people who are visual learners versus people who are not. Right? When you're a visual learner, a lot of times if someone's just talking and telling you and saying things, it doesn't click the same way that if you saw it in a visual format. Versus there are plenty of people that they can just listen to a podcast and great, they've got it down pat, right? And I think that that's another example that we can use to really bring out the point. One of the things that I think that we need to get into is when we talk about kosher manipulation. So, how do we utilize that to our benefit, right? So, we've spoken already about what is kosher manipulation. We've even given some examples. Let's delve a little deeper into that, though. Let's take it another step down. How can people utilize this to their benefit to really delve deeper into this process?
So I'm going to jump ahead just a minute and just explain two different concepts. One is our general way that we communicate with others without thinking is the way that we want to be communicated to. If I am used to, or I want people to tell me, hey, Toby, can you please give me the report in on time? I'm going to turn to Rachel and say, Rachel, I need the report in on time because that's the way I expect people to communicate with me. I am going to communicate with others. Now, here's the interesting thing is if you know how person A or how Rachel needs to be spoken to, I can go ahead to get that done. So the first baseline of being able to manipulate the conversation or get the things that you need is understand the different conversation and communication styles. So yes, it could be personality, it could be the differences that they need, the different types of learners. But once I understand their styles, can I communicate effectively?
Absolutely fascinating. So let's take that step a little bit deeper, right? So we have to understand one, how people think, how they process information, how they make decisions. But you're also saying that there's different communication styles, which I tapped on a little earlier. Let's delve into those. What are the different communication styles so that we can understand this conversation a little deeper?
I'm smiling because I just love this. Okay, so here it goes. There are generally four main communication styles. You are going to hear others, but I'm just delving into the four main typical styles. Number one is if I use the DIS model, it's going to be the first one is going to be known as the eagle. He's dominant, he's strong, he's a director. So that's communicator A. Communicator B would be known as a parrot or an influencer or entertainer. Somebody who likes the story, who loves to have a great time, life of a party, always embellishes different things. Communicator number 3 is a dove or somebody who enjoys the steadiness. over there. Somebody who is that caretaker personality, slow, steady, loyal. Communicator 4 is going to be an owl, or I like to call it as the analyst, somebody who thinks things through, or somebody who takes the time to understand something, needs data to back things up. Now, if I play around with them, I would say my eagle and my owl are usually facts over feelings. They like data. They like to be a straight shooter. They like to see things on pen and paper. They want things done. And if I take a look at my parrot and my caretaker, then they're usually feelings over facts, which means I'm going to use different words to get things done. Now, generally, my parrot and my eagle, fast. Really, really quick and fast. And generally, I would taking a look at the dove and taking a look at the owl or my analyst, they usually take things a little bit slower. So once I understand the 4 main communication styles and I understand how to talk to them and what it is that they're looking for, that's how I'm going to communicate that. I want you just to take a minute, and I want people to understand you may have more than one style. Sometimes you're fast. And sometimes you just want to review things. Or sometimes you love to hear that great story, and sometimes you just want those facts. However, we always have one dominant communication style. So I'm going to go straight to your dominant style to get what it is. If you don't mind, I would just like to give a great example for something like that.
Yes.
Okay, so let's say I'm taking a look at my eagle. I have an eagle who is my executive assistant, and my eagle is confident, assertive, going to go ahead to get things done. I'm going to take a look at my eagle and say, listen, please schedule this and this appointment for this and this date. I need it done today. And it's done. But let's say my executive assistant is a parrot, and I need them to schedule this particular appointment. I would approach my parrot and say, hey, can you do me a big favor? I know you're going to go ahead to get it done. I have such an important meeting. Can you please go ahead to schedule it? And they're going to do it gladly. They might want to know what the meeting is about, and they might want to hear some gossip, but they're going to go ahead to do it. And let's take a look at the third communicator, such as my dove, which is my caretaker. I would approach them. I really need your help on this. It's very important for me to get to this meeting on time. Can you please make sure it's scheduled, it's in my calendar, and I don't forget, and I might even need you to remind me maybe about it. Can I please rely on you to do it? And my dove, my caretaker, is going to be my pleasure, Toby, right? Because I am addressing how they want to be spoken to. And taking a look at my owl or my analyst is I would say, look, this meeting is very important because of this. Can you please make sure that it is in my schedule, and we're going to go ahead and to make sure to get it done, and just make sure that I have enough time to get there. My analyst is going to be like, oh, okay, let me take a look at the schedule. Let me open it. Okay, got that. Right? So I need one action, same action, but I'm going to talk to each of my communicators differently in order for me to get the action done happily, gladly, quickly, and efficiently.
I think it's amazing how deep this really goes, right? So there's so many different parts to it, right? And I'm excited, for the offer that you're going to be giving at the end that I'm definitely going to jump on myself. So just a little suspense there for everybody. But there's so many levels to this where so many times, especially, when we think of, ourselves as business owners, right? Or, we're trying to help someone with whatever it is that we're doing. A lot of times we talk to them, like you said, in the way that we want to be spoken to, or in the way we think that people want to be spoken to. And for most people, the idea of changing their resume every time they apply for a job is the same for this conversation. They're like, I'm not going to do that. Like, my resume is a resume. I am who I am. I'm just going to, send it in as is, right? Myself included. That being said, when it comes to communication with people, yes, you could say it in the way that you want to, but a point that I really want to bring out here, and, really what Mrs. Goldstein is saying is that you can do it in your own way. It just will be 10 times more effective if you can understand who you're talking to and how is going to be the best way for them to hear it. Right? Yeah. And that's what we're talking about over here.
I would love to jump in and just add, had I told my daughter, generally a director style, which is eagle straight, fast to the point. Had I told my daughter, the one who I asked nicely to please sweep the kitchen floor, had I told her, darling, sweetie, I used sweetie, sweep the kitchen floor, had to be like, excuse me? I mean, she'll say that a little bit respectfully, but that would be her general response. Now, it doesn't mean that she's a disrespectful child. It just means that I had graded upon her. It's like, whoa, you just threw that on top of me, and I can't deal with this at the moment because that's her personality. But had I approached her because I approached her softly, it was her absolute pleasure. So yes, we can't just talk the way we talk, but if we really want to get things done, then there's a way to do it. What's very interesting is a lot of people ask me, like, Toby, so I have to stop and think every single time I speak to people? Like, I can't just do this. I said, I want you to know two things. Number one is it does become second nature. When you end up realizing how somebody talks to you, you end up mirroring that once you get used to it. So you don't have to really stop and think, and how should I say it? Number two, if it's an important conversation, yes, you're definitely going to think it through. If it's just a basic, hey, please schedule this appointment for me, you're right. You don't have to stop and let's plan exactly what I'm going to say. But if it's something that's extremely urgent, something that's important, something that's crucial, you don't want to forget, take those 2 minutes. It's worth your while. But I can guarantee you that it does become second nature because I wasn't always like this. The people who I work with was not always like this. And they can't do it now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that leads us right into the next question, which is practically speaking, how do we apply this in real life, right? So, how do we really break down in a conversation we're having with someone in real time, although it will get easier with time, but what are the things that we need to look for?
So great. So people sometimes are not going to accept what you're going to say right away, such as let's just take a look at our eagle or our director. If I'm going to say, hey, can you please go ahead to do this? A lot of times there may be friction. Interestingly, just delving just a minute deeper into this, which I don't really want to spend the time, but sometimes as a director speaking to a director, you have to learn how to talk because there is friction over there. When we both share a same style, you're going to have to learn how to talk. So let's say I would just tell them to go ahead to do something and they're not interested. They're like, oh, okay, whatever. I'm going to go ahead to do it, or okay, I'll deal with it when I need to, or I'll deal with it, right? A lot of times you get the response, I'll deal with it, or later, I'll do it later. And you're a director, you said, hey, no, I want it now. And automatically your response, your communication response is going to kick in. At that point, it's understanding the director a little bit deeper. Here, the director needs control. So a lot of times I would just say, look, this is the result that I need. What's the best way for getting it done? So at that point is I'm giving them control. I'm being very direct and very forthfront. But I understand what is it that they need. So I would say, hey, this is the result that I need. What are you going to do to reach that result? So I end up giving them that control, and they generally are going to respond in kind. I do want to run through, let's say, the influence of the owl, which is our entertainer. But sometimes they're just going to smile and nod, and they'll just do whatever they want. Right? So now how do you deal with someone like that? Like they told you you're going to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them the picture, that vision of what it's going to look like when they're done. I would say, hey, everybody's really excited on that. I'm counting on you to get on board and to be able to do it. Can I count on you? And as soon as I'm giving them that center of that positive attention and energy, because this is what an entertainer wants, they want to be the life of the party, that they're going to go ahead to do it. So I'm also taking a look, not just on communicating that, but giving them what it is that they need. Director, a lot of times want that sense of control. I'm going to give it to them with the way I'm going to talk. The parrot, the influencer, wants to feel that they're the life of the party. I'm going to say, hey, everybody is excited. They're waiting to hear your response. And I'm going to give it to them. And we could even just take a look at the dove. Right? So sometimes they don't like conflict. And sometimes they'll just say yes and yes, and they just won't do it. And the question is why? What's going on? So that just takes me back to the understanding is, what does a dove need? Right? What does my caretaker need? My caretaker needs a sense of security. They need to feel safe. They're afraid to jump in. So sometimes I would say is like, look, I know you're uncomfortable. This is something that you're not used to, but I am here for you. Do you want me to train you into the process? Or do you want to try it for a week and let's check in? Right? So just taking a look at what each individual needs is going to get me back to what I want, the end result. So it's not only just the communication, but it's also understanding them as people or understanding their own personal needs. Now, how do I understand them as people? Is by knowing, what do these communicators need? What does this style need?
Right. And I think that one of the things, it's like you said, it's speaking in a way that people will resonate with because they will respond better, they listen better when they feel understood. Right? I think that that's the bottom line here. Is it's one of the things that we talk about, at least that I talk about all the time when it comes to sales, is it's not about getting to the end of the game at all. That's never where we want to be going. In reality, it's about understanding and clarity, right? If I fit into the picture or whoever it is that's giving the service, fantastic. But ultimately, it's really about understanding the overall picture of what's really going on with the person you're speaking to, what's going on in their world, where are they hurting, what it is that they need. And then from there, once you have that understanding and that clarity, well, that fits directly into what we're talking about right now, which is once you understand that piece, then you can understand as well how to speak to them in a way that will help them to really internalize and understand what it is that you're saying.
Correct. Is you're speaking to people. You're not speaking at people. And I say we even take it that step further. I'm not speaking to my executive assistant. I'm speaking to Rachel, my executive assistant. Right? And this is what Rachel needs.
Right. It's meeting people where they're at as opposed to, just throwing things at the wall and hoping it's going to stick. Right. Truly having empathy for the other person as a human being and realizing that it's not a game, right? These are people's lives that we're dealing with. And ultimately, and we hear this all the time when people, a lot of times we see this with people who we would call bosses as opposed to leaders, right? A lot of times they're just throwing things at people, right? With their words, do this, do that. And they seem very overbearing. And in reality, it could just be that the people they have working for them are much more soft and they're much more of an eagle. And therefore, they can't handle the communication style that the person has, as opposed to if they would be able to soften the way that they're communicating, which is where you come in, and really understanding the way that their people need to be spoken to, that's where that shift really comes into play. And all of a sudden, we're able to really have a completely different culture and way that people are really going to communicate with us and connect to us.
Correct. Can I give two real life examples that just
Please
recently
do.
occurred? Okay, so I'm going to give it from two separate perspectives, one from the boss's perspective and one from the employee's perspective. An employee recently reached out to me. She's trying to get a raise from her boss, and every time she goes into her boss, he nods his head and says, sure, 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 you deserve that raise, and nothing comes through. Nothing is panning out. She never ends up getting that raise. And she came to me and she's like really, really frustrated. She said, Toby, what's going on? I said, listen, this is what your boss needs. After figuring out his style, I said, he needs facts. Why are you performing well? Why are you performing better than anybody else? And why do you deserve that raise? He doesn't need feelings. He knows that you're a good employee, but he wants hard, concrete facts. Not only does he want these hard, concrete facts, you're going to have to follow up, not just verbally, but he needs that written word in front of him in order for it to happen. And interestingly, she just messaged me earlier today just to say, hey, I want to just tell you I got my raise, which is she sat down and spoke to the boss the way he needed to hear from her. Yes. And it's interesting because she was so surprised, like, well, I did it. I did it so many times. I went in, I spoke to him. What's going on? Why isn't it working? I said, do me a favor. Take this step by step. Right, and then let's take it from there. And let's just flip it on the backside is with an employer. An employer was struggling. The boss was struggling with an employee, and they just couldn't understand why they were not finishing their work on time and they weren't getting anything. We checked; it was the right person. He was doing well. He had the skills. He had the tools. He had the capabilities. But what was that piece that they were missing? That this particular employee was just not doing the work that they needed him to do. I sat down with the employee afterwards, and it boiled down to that lack of clarity and lack of expectations. And then when I turned to the employer to share that particular piece, the employer's like, what do you mean? He knows that. Here's his job description. You know how many times we met with him about that? And I said, really? Tell me, what did you tell him? How did you tell it to him? And that's when we came to the realization she thought she told him what she needed. He did not hear what she needed.
Right. And it's amazing because human beings are a world unto themselves, each and every single one of us, right? And the more that we delve into this, the more I think that we can see a little bit of a peek at that, where there are so many different parts of everyday business that show us how important it is to have great communication and to really help people to have clarity and understanding, and for us to understand others as well, to actively listen and genuinely care. but there's always another step that could be taken. Right. And I think that, especially for myself, it's a fascinating conversation where I've definitely heard about the concept before, the different types of, ways that people accept information and the way that their styles are in communication. But really delving deep into the nitty gritties and seeing the real life examples that you're giving us, it's a whole different world. And in the way that people really accept the words that you say and how they interpret those words also has a very big effect in the way that you communicate it, right? So I think here's an interesting question. And this might be a little bit of a curveball, but what do we do if it doesn't work?
It's a great question, and I appreciate the curveball. It may not always work, but most of the time is you're not doing it right, or it's not the right time or place or tone of how you're doing it. If I'm going to approach a director, or we can call it our eagle, my straight shooter, and come in to tell them about something because I need XYZ to happen tomorrow, and all of a sudden that person said, I'm not doing it now. What happened? I responded. I communicated the way I thought they're going to need. I was confident with that. I gave them the opportunity to make the decision. I took all of that into consideration, and they're still telling me they're not doing it, or it's not going to go ahead to get done. What happened? Where did I go wrong? I was like, I'll tell you where you went wrong. You caught him right now when he has a deadline coming up in 2 weeks, and he is up to his throat with that deadline, and he has 3 people that he has to call back and a slew of emails. Of course it's not going to work. I said, we're a person, we're not a machine. There's no computer over here. So yes, you could communicate, but take a look at the entire picture and say, what's going on? And a lot of times you can get to what's going on by having a conversation, right? Once again, it's communicating effectively. You say, hey, David, what's going on? Why can't you do it? Right? Or how can I help you? Or that's if David is my director. Sorry, my ego, the person who I speak to directly. With my parent, I'm going to approach it differently. But once again, I'm going to have that conversation. I'm not beating around the bush. I say, David, you're always willing to go above and beyond over here. And you know how important it is for us and what a difference it's going to make. What can we do to make sure it gets done? What can I do on my part? Right? So it's not that it's not working effectively. It's you did not know how to work it effectively. You did not take that step back and say, okay, big picture, what's going on, what's happening? And therefore, I do tell people, yes, when you have a crucial or critical conversation that needs to be had, is take that step back and say, what's the best way to have it? How am I taking everything into consideration? How am I advocating for open communication?
Right. And I think that it's amazing how many different facets it has as well. Right. Because like you said, there's a little nuance there where everything was said correctly, but the ending wasn't, right? Because you're not taking the bigger picture of what's going on in their world. What are they dealing with that's going to have an effect that's going to, just create a situation where it's going to be two heads bashing together because there's just too much going on. And even though in a regular situation that person would, step in and take care of it, no problem, but it's asking that next question. Okay, what's going on? Usually this isn't the reaction that I get from you. Tell me more about what's happening right now. Is there something going on that I don't know about? Is there something I could do to step in to help? Right? It's just understanding more about the situation. And I think that actually leads directly into the next question, which has to do with other aspects of communication tips that will really help us to communicate effectively, right? So empathy is one of the pieces that we're talking about right now. But what are some other communication tips that are really important for us to know?
So here's some very cool tips. Number 1 is learn how to actively listen. Actively listening takes a lot of energy. It's not simple. I myself had to learn how to actively listen, and it does take energy. There are times that I can have an employee walk into my office. I'm busy on the computer, responding to an email, doing whatever it is, and they need me. And sometimes I would turn to them and say, do I need to stop and listen, or can I still work and listen? And they would tell me at this point, it's like, no, Toby, I need your full attention. And I would put that computer away and actively listen. And sometimes if they just need a yes or no response and I can still continue typing, I love those. Because actively listening takes that energy. So I would say actively listening is a very important piece. And the second one is read body language. Because body language is going to tell you the truth. People could easily lie. Body language is much harder to lie. It's because at that point they have to stop and think.
Yeah, definitely. I think that I'll even add as well. I mean, empathy we spoke about, but I think clear framing and really trying to understand that even in negotiation, people make this mistake. They think that there's supposed to be a winner and a loser in a conversation, but in reality, it's all about you and me versus a situation. It's you and me versus a problem, right? So understanding that situations don't have to come out with a winner and loser. We could actually have win-win situations, right? So making sure you're meeting people where they're at and really trying to understand them and framing a situation in a way that's going to allow for that to happen, I think, is another important piece as well.
I
Um,
appreciate you bringing up that piece because I just do want to jump in just to mention is a conversation is a feedback loop from speaker to listener, listener to speaker, back and forth, and they end up, the speaker ends up becoming the listener, listener ends up becoming the speaker, back and forth. That's how it's the win-win. When you have one person talking, that's not a win. That's instructing or directing somebody to talk, right? The goal is that we both should leave the conversation happy. And we both understand what those next steps are going to be. And that's that win-win. I'm not telling you to go ahead to do it. It's let's work together, such as I would be telling my parents, you want to do it. And I know that they want to do it because I know that this is who they are, right? The director wants to get things done and wants to accomplish. So let's go ahead, let's do it because that's who they are, right? So it's going to be a win-win if we have that conversation. Not that I'm giving instruction or direction, but it's a give and take. It's back and forth. It's let's make this a win-win for both. And we can make it a win-win for both if I take your needs into consideration.
right. Yeah, and I think that's a very important point because, like you said, actively listening plays a very big role in that and being genuinely curious about people when we're speaking to them and trying to understand them. But we're only going to be able to take the next step in the conversation when you've taken the first, right? You can't run before you can walk. You can't walk before you can crawl. And I think that that's a very important point is that it's a loop, right? You have to take step one in order to get to step two. You can't jump over steps because that's when there's going to be those miscommunications. And at the end, you're going to just be missing. It's going to be the crossing of wires. In wrapping it up, and then I want to open the floor to Q&A if anybody has any questions here. Let's put a bow on this, right? What are some things that you would want to just in wrapping up over here that you would want to share?
Communication is work, but it's well worth the effort. You get to accomplish much more when you communicate effectively. You make a difference in your life and in others' lives. It's when you learn how to communicate. Just like you learn how to walk, it's so much easier to walk than to crawl. But yes, you fell a couple of times. It's the same with communication. You might fall a couple of times, but it's really, really well worth the effort to take that time to invest and say, hey, how am I going to speak? What's the best way for me to get my message across? And once again, it's goes even back to building the culture, whether it's the culture at home, culture at work, culture amongst your colleagues. It's knowing how to communicate. And communication, as I like to say, is one of the most powerful, potent tools in the workforce. And you got to learn how to use it correctly and wisely and safely. Right? How am I going to get what I need in a safe way that everybody feels safe and that I feel good and they feel good? Going back to that win-win conversation. So I'd just like to say is make sure you use communication effectively. I like to share is, set the stage before you act on it, is making sure that, yes, sometimes you are prepared, but it is the most potent weapon in the workforce, and just use it wisely.
Absolutely love that. And anybody who has any questions, you can feel free to put them into the chat. In the meantime, I'll respond to that as well. I think that, and we had discussed this earlier as well, but effective communication isn't about control, right? It's really about that alignment. It's about making sure that we're on the same page, that we both are connecting with each other and we understand the mutually benefit of whatever it is that we're trying to get out of it. Like I don't think that I'll ever forget this, but I had a conversation with a client of mine, and at the end of our meeting, he had said he was going to take care of something, came the following week. It still wasn't taken care of. And I reached out and I said, hey, what's going on with this? And he's like, oh, you know what? I've changed my mind. I'm not really sure how to go about it. Right. In that moment, it's really understanding, hey, wait a minute. What's going on? Right. What's changed? What's happening? As opposed to, it's the difference really between reaction, just reacting to a situation versus emotionally understanding what's happening. Right. And being able to respond with empathy. Right. And I think that when we're able to really make that switch, when we're able to really truly be genuinely curious about the person we're speaking to and what's going on in their world, that's when we're able to align those, you know, the needs of each individual in the best way possible.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. The whole different world. Okay, great. So in ending here, a question that I think that we did touch on this, but I want to make sure to delve into it a little deeper based on, what's coming in. So we spoke about a lot of different information, right? We spoke about, I'm just going to preface with this. We spoke about a lot of information. We spoke about facts over feelings. We spoke about fast versus slow. And we also spoke that it's going to take time and learning the different communication styles, understanding what are going to be those signals that are going to help us to understand who is the different type and how to go about that. Where is a place that we can get more information that's going to give us somewhat of a guide maybe, to help us to really delve deeper into that initial diagnostic phase, right? Because that's really, especially, I'll give you a great example to this, I think, when someone's having a discovery call, right? So you could speak to someone over text, or they could find out about you, schedule time in your calendar. This happens to me all the time. You're having the first conversation with them. You've never spoken to them before. You don't know anything about them. That first conversation, many times, is going to be the make or break or whether they're going to actually work with you. Sometimes it could be the way you follow up, right? Or lack thereof. But what are some of the ways that we can understand a little bit deeper about this conversation?
So people can take a look, understanding their communication style and the best way to communicate. I usually say take a minute just to step back to study yourself and your style. I actually, want people to understand how do the others around me communicate, the best way for me to go ahead to communicate so that I can learn to communicate with others. There is that simple book is, how to talk to children, right? So that they learn to listen. So that book is
Mm-hmm.
actually great. There is one out there for the workforce as well. There also is an online communication tool that people can use. It works really with the 5 love languages, but it does touch upon, they have one out there for in regards to communications. I would tell people, if you want to delve a little bit further into something like that, definitely do take a look. The DISC style model does talk a little bit about the different style communications. I always say practice makes you perfect, right? Constant role play, constant understanding, constant tweaking. Did this work? Did this not work? What's going on? Why yes? Why no? I usually tell people, you want to have a conversation, pick up the phone and let's do a role play. I said, let's really go ahead to put you into it so that you understand how to talk. And what is really fascinating is that at a certain point when you're working with somebody for quite some time, you already can imagine what that person is going to tell you. Why is that? It's because you know their style subconsciously, but you don't realize it, right? Because you
Right.
know exactly how they're going. So now comes in the kosher manipulation. How can I manipulate that to get the response that I want? Is you obviously going to tweak something and change something to get that response a little bit different than you know what you're probably going to be getting.
Absolutely. So I always like to end the podcast with reminding everybody I have an absolute page of notes over here. And if I was going to try to implement all these things, there's no question I would fall on my nose, fall on my face, break my nose. It's not going to be pretty. So we always suggest at the end of these podcasts, please take one thing, start slow. Baby steps will take you a lot farther than if you try to run before you can walk. So please go slowly as you try to work your way through the things that you've learned here today. And in that vein, Mrs. Goldstein, tell us about the offer that we told them we would tell them about at the end of the podcast. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I have actually a great assessment tool in order for you to be able to understand how you generally communicate, and also tips and tools how to communicate with other styles, such as if you are an eagle, how are you going to communicate with a parrot, how are you going to communicate with an owl, so on and so forth. And if you are an owl, how are you going to, if you're a parrot, how are you going to communicate? But it's also a test that's going to tell you what you are, and you're all of a sudden going to realize, say, hey, this is really what I do. This is interesting.
Right. Absolutely fantastic. So the link itself will definitely be in the description of the podcast, as will Mrs. Goldstein's contact information for LinkedIn. For myself as well, I'd like to, these live podcasts are all about speaking about things that are timely, interesting, that we can add to our skill set toolbox. If you loved the live podcast today, you can feel free to reach out to myself as well if you have any questions, or if you're looking for a 30-minute free strategy session to take your sales game to the next level. Whatever it is, you can feel free to reach out to me. My contact information as well will be in the description and in the chat. And to everyone who's here, thank you so much for being here, Mrs. Goldstein. This was an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate the time that you've given us today. I definitely learned a tremendous amount, and I'm sure it's going to be extremely impactful.
Thank you. And here's to great conversations.
Absolutely. And to everyone else who's here, thank you so much for joining us. Until next week, have a fantastic rest of your day. Take care